Aging is something we all experience, but rarely do we stop to notice the tiny ways it shapes our routines, how we reach, bend, climb, and move through the spaces we call home. Welcome to the podcast where we explore those changes with curiosity, compassion, and practical solutions. Today I'm joined by Margot McWhirter, a community advocate with over 30 years of experience in both the public and private healthcare sectors. Margot is the founder of Inclusive Aging, an organization dedicated to ensuring older adults are valued and supported in the spaces they live, work, shop, and play. In this episode of Moving Through Time, we're looking at what really shifts as we age and the thoughtful modifications that can help keep us safe, confident, and connected. Margot, thank you for coming and talking about mobility in terms of aging people, seniors, and people with disabilities. I know that you have a certificate in adaptive and that you're an occupational therapist. How would you describe safety in terms of aging and people with disabilities?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's certainly a pleasure to be speaking with you today. When I reflect on my 30 plus years of practice in aging, so geriatrics or gerontology, and certainly working with people with disabilities and thinking about safety at home and in the community, I really think of it in sort of a couple of different ways. The most basic and maybe more traditional way is around home safety from the perspective of, are there any, tripping hazards or obstacles in the home? Are there physical barriers, perhaps for somebody with a mobility limitation, or even some challenges around endurance as a result of heart disease or a lung condition that make things like going up and down stairs a challenge?
Yes.
And then always around home safety is safety in the bathroom, because that's a wet area, it's a slippery area.
Yes.
We may either be rushing to get to the bathroom or rushing to get done and out and dressed and warm again. And so, really kind of thinking about it in that very kind of physical perspective. And then in a broader perspective, when I think of safety, I'm really thinking of it, and a lot of the conversations I have with the clients and families that I work with and other healthcare professionals and providers is around risk assessment and then managing risk. I always say that each of us lives at risk every day. If we have capacity, then we intentionally make those choices and decisions. And hopefully, if we choose an action or a behavior that increases our risk, that we're weighing the odds and then acting accordingly. As people age, not that they lose the capacity necessarily, although some people do, but in other cases, they may misjudge their ability to cope in a situation or even to evaluate the degree of risk. And so I don't believe in bubble wrapping seniors. I don't think that that's living. So I do encourage people to live at risk, but to think about how often that sort of threat or that risk level is there, what degree of risk exists, and how comfortable are they? That often becomes a whole conversation separately, because the older adult or at any age may be very comfortable with living at a high degree of risk, and their family members hold a high degree of concern. So then it's like, okay, how do we navigate and negotiate that kind of disconnect, if you will, or opportunity for better communication? And then, because we're not looking at eliminating risk, how do we manage it in a way that lets people live life to the full extent that's meaningful and purposeful for them? But that also reduces a risk of injury or severity of injury if something unexpected were to happen.
Yeah. Do you deal with any cases where the senior or person with disability is living alone and are not fully accepting of the risks or some cases of injuries? They're sort of in denial about it.
Yes, yeah. So that's a really good question. And, whether a senior or older adult lives alone or even with somebody else, and their perception of that risk and that safety hazard is maybe different than others around them.
Yes.
That is not uncommon. I often say that because I'm working with people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and even into 100, those individuals, I'm meeting them after a lifetime of experience.
Yes.
And I don't believe in guiding or advising or prescribing solutions for people based on fear and what if. It's more, let's have a conversation and really sort of seek to understand what somebody's motivation is. I know a number of clients that I work with who are very comfortable living with a high degree of risk, which they may or may not evaluate as being as high as others around them would, but they would far rather do that and live with the consequences than live a half life, essentially, and feel bored, isolated, understimulated, etc. So it's really looking at people's understanding of their situation, what their values are, and then coming to some mutual understanding. And in some cases, what I'm doing is I'm providing information and giving people the opportunity to make a choice, to take one course of action or another, but let them know that, hopefully options remain on the table, even if they choose, sort of path A to begin with. And then they discover through experiential learning, hopefully not by accident, but, sometimes that happens too. It's like, maybe now is the time, because that's the other piece, using certain conversation and even assessment or interviewing techniques, asking people questions like, well, what might change or what might have to look different for you to be willing to consider or open to the idea of change? Or is there one or two small changes that you might be willing to make now that hopefully will set you up for long-term success?
Yes.
Because, as I like to say, aging is not a disease, so we don't need to always manage it medically. It's very much part of the life cycle, and we all, are sentient beings allowed to make decisions for ourselves, even if it's a choice that not others would agree with. And then, it's life is a journey. It's not an all or nothing binary of total risk and zero risk.
Yeah, it's very insightful. I do have parents who are, one of them just turned 70 and the other one is 72. So they're definitely reaching that age where they might start to consider accommodations. My dad, I think around the age of almost 60, he had to get a pacemaker because he was struggling to go up the stairs, even just to bed, or we didn't have a washroom on the main floor, so trying to, rush to go to the washroom.
Exactly.
Luckily, he never fell, but he could definitely feel his heart was pounding much more than it should have.
Yeah, it had to work hard.
Yes, yeah. It's very interesting because now we have the expertise in technology where we can, give someone a pacemaker. I'm sure that's probably why one of the reasons why a lot of people are living longer.
Yes.
Because back in the day, we didn't have all of these things.
Medical innovations.
Yes.
For this episode, Moving Through Time has partnered with Insight Voices podcast, and this podcast talks about the funding of future aging.
We'll be exploring the funding of future aging by lead of partnerships and fundraising as the National Institute of Aging.
Just a student, I want to find out more.
It's about building relationships with people.
What is your main mission?
Our partner's not quite public yet, so I can't say it out loud, but
we want to, not have this empty water, main core information.
Vaccines to get and, find out more information about them. In caregiving in the workplace.
Workshop in the Humber Valley Church.
Landscape is changing. Raising is all people give to people. Emotion involved in giving.
Insight Voices is also featured on the Digipod podcast. If you would like to watch their episode, you can find it on their website. Now let's get back to Moving Through Time.
Are there any modifications that you can make in your home that are sort of out of the box? I think a lot of people think of handrails, for example, in the washroom when you're showering, or I know people who are older or have disabilities, they tend to live in a one-story home, or if they have stairs, they have that, I don't know what it's called, the chair that
Chair stair lift.
yes, the chair stair lift. But are there any modifications that I or some people might not know of?
So one of the ways in which I practice occupational therapy and advise clients and families around home modifications is by applying the design approach or philosophy of universal or inclusive design. And that really speaks to sort of that out of the box, but also kind of conversely, sometimes very simple and elegant design, so that we don't have to sacrifice aesthetics to have something be accessible.
Yes.
And so a couple of examples, you talked about things like grab bars, and even in that realm, there are gorgeous grab bars that, like when we talk about, faucets or drawer pulls or, cupboard handles being the jewelry in a design space or in a space that people are using, you can have beautiful grab bars. As well, thinking about things that lean into some of those more typical age-related changes. So some of the most common age-related changes that can happen, and I'm in my mid to late 50s, so I've already seen it happening, and it can happen throughout, later life, is things like, for various reasons, decreased mobility or flexibility and increased pain.
Yes.
And so when we think about designing the environment or making even small changes, some things that can be really helpful are things like planning your space. It might be reorganizing where things are stored in the kitchen, because, whether it's lifting heavy things and not wanting to lift and lower, so actually creating drawers on the lower cabinets, even if it's still cupboard shelf, but you can install aftermarket apparatus to turn them into slide out drawers so you're not bending and reaching down.
Yes.
The idea is bring things to you
Yes.
rather than you going to it.
Yeah.
Even things like color contrast. So whether that's, somebody's getting their home repainted just for, preference, or it's time, using some color contrast between, like on the baseboards and around the door frames, even things like color contrast of electrical outlets and light sockets. For somebody that's lived in their home for a long time, they're like, well, what do I need that for? I know where, all of these things are. But as we age, sometimes our eyesight can diminish. And even as a result of certain health issues, our perception and kind of the information that our brain takes in through our eyes, we can't just only rely on kind of muscle memory or knowledge of the space. We need our environment to give us those kind of silent messages. So color contrast. And then something else that's really key, and I recommend this in almost every situation, is lighting. Because again, of common normal age-related changes to vision, even if somebody's visual acuity remains good, sometimes our ability to adjust between light and dark, and as we're recording this, having this conversation, we're going into the months of fall and winter where the hours of daylight are less. And so having more lighting, both interior and exterior, is a safety issue. It can be a security issue, but it can also be a functional issue in terms of how you navigate your space. So those are just a few, key examples, but certainly, when I'm assessing a client's home, I'm evaluating them and how they are able to move about their home. I'm looking at very basic things like strength, like balance, endurance, to a certain extent, even in terms of motivation. Like if somebody has a multi-story home and the laundry's in the basement, and they don't mind if somebody else does the laundry for them now, we don't need to worry about bringing the laundry up from the basement, but we're going to, talk about connecting with support services. But just back to the earlier point I was making, when I go in and meet with clients, I'm evaluating how readily and how comfortably can they get in and out of their home? Can they move around within their home, including if that means going up and down more than one level? And then can they use key spaces like the bathroom, the bedroom, and the kitchen?
Yeah.
Because the other piece, when I talk about aging in place, which is this notion of staying in the home that is most meaningful to the elder, and then adapting the space, but also bringing in services as their own needs change, rather than thinking about having to move, is I don't want somebody to age in place if it really just means being isolated inside the four walls of their home. I want them to be able to get out, not only for medical appointments, but also for the fun things, for the meaningful things. Or maybe it's that they have visitors who have mobility issues. And so we want to make that home welcoming for others as well.
Yeah. I'm sure we've come a long way from even 50 years ago to accommodating these seniors and people with disabilities. Is there anything, well, there probably is, but that you know of that can be improved, or are there any areas that we haven't even taken steps to accommodate in that area?
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind immediately, as you're asking that question, is we've known about a lot of things for a long time.
Yes.
And there's a difference between knowing and doing.
Yes.
And that's both at the individual level. So as individuals and families, with older loved ones, we can talk about things for a long time and then things don't change.
Yeah.
And then at a broader kind of social or societal level, we see that as well, in the sense that, even now with certain changes and improvements in building code, in municipal bylaws, etc., we do still see significant room for improvement around designing spaces, so homes, but also public spaces, around objects or products, and certainly services and programs that are far more inclusive of the breadth of our population in terms of physical and cognitive ability. And because we live in a designed world, I like to remind myself and others that if something isn't working, again, from a safety or just even a basic functional level, or because it excludes somebody or a group of somebodies, then that's an opportunity for change. Very recently in my own family, my parents, my mom is 88, my dad's 91. They still live in the house that my sisters and I grew up in. I talk about them all the time. And my mom, who has friends at various stages of health and life, she still drives, and many of her friends do not. And so friends decided together with my mom that they were going to go and visit a friend in hospital. And so my mom agreed that she was going to go and pick up another friend. And this other friend lives in a retirement residence, and she no longer drives, and wanted to do one or two things while they were out. When I was growing up, we had the expression, it was a be so kind. Would you be so kind?
Yes.
Would you be so kind to stop here on our way to the hospital? Would you be so kind? And so my mom, who is a lovely, caring, kind person, says absolutely no problem. And then that basically burns through some of her reserves in terms of energy.
Yes.
And so by the time they got towards the end of their visit and everything, there were one or two more be so kinds on her friends list. And my mom, thankfully, stood up and said, I really can't, not today.
Yeah.
Happy to do it again.
Yes.
So all of that is, long-winded way or a story of demonstrating that when we think about a city, urban or rural, with or without public transportation, when you've got, like my mom can drive. But there's a difference between driving from A to B, especially going in familiar places and areas, destinations, and then something else where you're traveling with somebody else who's talking with you, who's maybe a little bit of a distraction in all the good ways, and then being asked to, or even by choice, wanting to stop at 2 or 3 places new. So we have to figure out where it is. We have to figure out the parking situation. Her friend that she was taking on these Be So Kind errands has a walker. So there were just all of the things.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, for me, a really good example of when designers and policymakers and politicians and even just like program operators, for lack of a better term, it's really about kind of putting yourself in the shoes of the population or the clientele or whatever members of the public that you are aiming to serve. Because if we don't really understand it from a human level, then often what we can discover is that design is actually, there's built-in exclusion rather than built-in inclusion into
Right.
that design approach.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of testing, obviously you identify a problem or a risk of safety, and then trying to come up with a solution, you obviously need to test it. Do you just get seniors and people with disabilities, or is there a way to kind of make a normal or a person who doesn't have these difficulties feel like literally put them into these people's
create
shoes?
that lived experience, almost like a
Yes.
simulation.
Yeah.
So that's not something that I'm involved in. I know that there are like simulation suits and there are other activities or exercises that can be done. 30 plus years ago when I went through undergrad for gerontology, that very much was a homework assignment, to wear the goggles, to wear the rubber gloves, to try and simulate what it's like to have loss of vision, loss of sensation in your hands, or loss of dexterity. And as I say, things like that, experiences like that, and simulations still go on as the disability community, as well as the senior community, continues to self-advocate. There's a greater appreciation, rather than for somebody who doesn't currently have a disability or a visible disability, perhaps is a better way of putting it, rather than trying to have an empathy building exercise with a simulation. It can be far more valuable and powerful for those individuals, scientists, students, practitioners, etc., to meet with and interview or observe somebody who's actually living that.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's all of the little things as well as the big things. And that's not to diminish simulation in certain circumstances. But yeah, I think my understanding and my experience is far better to hear from the people that are actually living that, as opposed to pretending, even for a short period of time.
Yeah.
There certainly would be, and I don't want to profess to speak for population of people living with disabilities, but there would be, I think, a lot of advocacy among that community to suggest that that's very ableist to basically put on a disability.
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's no lack of people who would be willing to test, hopefully.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes it's you can take a walk down your street, you can, go to your grocery store or take public transit, whatever. Like, again, in my world, my world includes older adults and people with disabilities. And so I want to see them in all of the places and spaces that I get to go. And then just interact with them human to human, as opposed to sort of an us and them.
Yes, yeah. I'm curious, what struck your curiosity in getting in this field?
So I was very fortunate. I am very fortunate that I have good family genes. And so both sets of maternal and paternal grandparents lived to quite late life, late 80s, 90s. And my grandparents were unique, as you and I are unique. And I just remember having wonderful experiences with them. And perhaps because I'm the youngest in my family, and so my older sisters were always telling me to grow up. And, that idea of hanging around with older people. And it's not that my sisters are much older than I am, but I have just always enjoyed the company of older people and the wisdom. And it just seemed natural that when it came time for me to think about what I wanted to do And even as an occupational therapist, there's, occupational therapists quite literally work with people from cradle to grave. And there are a lot of occupational therapists that work in pediatrics on feeding programs and handwriting and school therapy. And I love kids, but I knew that was not those weren't my people. My people were the adults and older adults, who lived in the community or were hoping to be able to continue to live in the community. And the whole idea of occupational therapy as a rehab science is really focusing on function. And for me and other occupational therapists, it's sort of helping people either regain skills if they've had an illness or an injury, or modifying the environment or the way in which they're doing a particular task. So it may be work, it may be leisure, it may be personal care, but basically adjusting any or all of those three components and really turning the impossible to I'm possible.
Yes. Yeah. I love that saying because, of course, there are things that are quite literally impossible, but I do like thinking that impossible stands for I'm possible.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can completely relate to you. My parents being older, I grew up around a lot of older people. I'm also in that age range where I kind of have older friends, anywhere between 5 and 10 years age difference. Sometimes I feel like the younger one, sometimes I feel like the older one. Yeah.
It's neat to be able to sort of shapeshift that way and show up however you want to show up, but then for the people in your life, maybe how they need you to show up.
Yes.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
You're welcome.